Salve, salve. Deixa eu botar a mão aqui na frente do microfone.
Good morning, everyone. Let me cover the microphone so that in case we have some people who are hard of hearing, they may locate where I am.
Falar sempre, mas a gente fala qual é a orientação.
We always want to describe where we are. It's always important that when we're on stage, we speak far away from the microphone so that in case we have people who have visual impairment,
Caixas de som acaba que ela perde essa referência. Bom dia. Como vocês estão?
Morning. How are you? I hope you are all well. My name is Marcelo Zig, and now I'm going to do my audio description. I'm a black man with dark skin. I have dreadlocks. I'm wearing round black glasses. I have a beard, a gray beard, no mustache. I'm using a white shirt. I'm wearing jeans, black sneakers, and I'm sitting on my wheelchair because I have a person with a disability, PCD, or person with a disability. So I'm a black person with a disability. And I like to say that because we work at this intersectionality of race and disability. So today it'll be my pleasure to be the master of ceremony. This is the last day of the 4th edition of the Sesc Rio Conference on Education. This is an event that has been happening since Wednesday, both online and in person. The idea of this edition was to ask everyone to reflect about the topic, which is the awakening of awareness. And this asks us to consider the pillars that support the educational activities at Sesc Rio. So ideas such as anti-ableism, anti-racism, and scientific literacy, topics which engage deeply with the complexity of the contemporary world. We have world-renowned researchers with us today, people like Gabriel Chalita, Marcelo Zig, David Rodrigues, Emílio Figueira, Conceição Evaristo, who gave an incredible talk yesterday. We also have Isaka Mainasara, he gave a great talk yesterday as well. We have Ani Okoro, Carlos Alvarez. Carlos Alvarez said some very meaningful things yesterday. We also have Alicia Fernandes, Alian Wamiri Guajajara, but that's not it. Today we have a new round of talks regarding the following question: is education without inclusion really education? So to talk about these topics, I'd like to call on stage a professor and speaker specialized in inclusive education, Emílio Figueira. There will be a video with his talk. And then later on today, in the questions and answers session, he will be participating live. We also will have with us a professor and member of the Portuguese National Education Council, David Rodrigues. And we have with us a professor from the Federal Fluminense University, who's also the leader of a research group called the Observatory about Inclusion in Education and Human Rights, Jaqueline Gomes. She will be mediating this debate. Good morning. So welcome to this event. I'm really happy to be here next to you, Marcelo, and it's great to be a part of this team. We are a large team here today. I am Jaqueline. And I'm here just to conduct this debate because amongst all of these enlightened people, we are just intermediaries. But I feel privileged to be here sharing this morning with all of you. This brings me a lot of joy. So I will first start by introducing myself. I am a light-skinned woman. I have light brown hair. I'm wearing black pants, a shirt with lots of patterns. I have children. I have dreams and I'm hopeful about the future. And I'd like to share my dreams with all of you here today. I would also like to thank the sign language interpreters, Amanda and Deborah. So let's give them a round of applause. I think it's really important for us to have accessibility and linguistic accessibility at this event. I would also like to thank Marcelo for his introduction. And now I would like to introduce the people who are a part of this roundtable. We have David Rodrigues and Emílio Figueira. So Emílio's presentation will be in video form. Emílio is a journalist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist. He's a playwright, a poet. And because of asphyxia during when he was born, he ended up having motor issues. He's the author of lots of different books, plays, and scripts. And he's been writing about inclusion. He received more than 22 prizes. So let's give him a round of applause. And I'd like to introduce my other colleague who's next to me, Professor David Rodrigues, who's a special education specialist. He got his PhD at the University of Lisbon. He's lectured at many international universities in Belgium, in Brazil, and in China. And he started his professorship in 2015. He's worked at many international projects for UNESCO and UNICEF. And he's been working with social inclusion and human rights. He's a speaker in countries in Europe, Africa, and North and South America. He's published more than 32 books and lots of articles. He's the founder of the NGO Pro Inclusion. He was its president up until 2020. And he's also an author of an article of a magazine called Special Inclusion. He's gotten many awards. And he received the Golden Medal of Human Rights. And he received an order, a special award from the Portuguese government. So let's give him a round of applause, please. So this morning, we're going to be showing a video with Emílio Figueira. So let's present this video first, and then after that, I will give the floor to Professor David. And then Marcelo will say a few things.
O poder transformador e inesperado da educação nas vidas de todos. Por Emílio Figueira.
Especialmente o que eu vi com essa minha obra. Eu tenho padecido de ficar asfixia durante o meu parto em 1969. Numa época que nós, pessoas com deficiência, é totalmente excluída da sociedade. Mas, graças à reabilitação que tive nessa de educação escola pública, eu consegui estudar. Eu fiz 3 faculdades, jornalismo, psicologia e teologia. Eu tive uma carreira científica
scientific career, and I published many different articles in 8 countries. I've also written for theater, I've written for cinema. In terms of books, I have 92 published books. Now, so as not to be speaking here with all of you with subtitles, I prepared some parts of my speech, and I decided to use artificial intelligence to have that text narrated. So again, I decided to use a narrator to present the content of my talk. So this is a way for me to show you how people with disabilities can use assistive technology. We can use assistive technology to communicate and even to give a talk. And that's what I'll be doing. Okay, so as I said in the previous video, now I'll be using artificial intelligence to narrate my talk. This is a way to show all of you how we, people with disabilities, can use technology in our favor to communicate. So I'd like to start by thanking Sesc Rio for inviting me to participate in the 4th edition of Sesc Rio, the Awakening of Awareness. After 40 years researching, talking, and writing about inclusion, psychology in people with disabilities, and rehabilitation, I could talk about lots of different topics involving these themes. But I know that here at this conference there are incredible people to talk about all of these different topics. So I would like to actually focus my talk on my personal experience and my impressions. So let's start. So when I developed cerebral palsy when I was born in the 1960s, and when I ended up having problems with speech and motor coordination. So for a lot of people, my destiny was already set. I would become dependent on other people, and I would be isolated inside institutions. And this is especially true at the time when people with disabilities lived completely isolated from the rest of society. Some doctors said that I wouldn't even be able to learn how to read and write. But my parents didn't believe that, and they taught me how to read and write when I was 5 years old. And that's when I discovered the world of literature. And I started to write, and I said that I would become a writer. So this was the first essential foundation of my life. So since I was small, my family never doubted me. They always sought different therapeutical and educational resources to help me. They treated me equally. They treated me the same as my brothers and sisters and other children, and they moved me forward. My first few years were spent isolated in an association that assisted children with disabilities. In 1977, I was transferred to AACD in Santana. At that time, there was a wall that separated our unit from the Buenos Aires school, so that we, the children with disabilities, couldn't be in touch with the other children. A lot of times, I would look at the yard next door, and I would be watching the children running and playing around, and I couldn't participate in those activities. And when our school had some kind of celebration, we could actually go to that yard of the other school, but we were always separated from the other children, and we were always monitored. But I actually got to know the two sides of education. In 1981, when I left AACD at 11 years of age, my family was able to obtain a document that the government issued at the time, and this was a document that would allow people with disabilities to participate or to attend so-called normal schools. So I I got enrolled at a public school in a small town, where my maternal grandparents lived. Now, at AACD, I studied at what was the equivalent of fourth grade. And when I changed schools, they thought I wouldn't be able to keep up, so I was actually enrolled at second grade. So I went to Professor Maroca's class, and this was a teacher that in the 60s and 70s would walk around town and would look for children with different disabilities. So he would take these children to schools, and he would create all of the different pedagogical conditions to educate these children. So Maroca was already promoting inclusion during a time when people didn't believe in this. So this was a professor that believed in himself and did everything to educate these children.
In class, Maroca, he began to follow my work, and he developed materials that I could use as well. And when I did my tests, I had to do tests, and I had to get the grades to be able to pass each year. I didn't have any privilege, and there shouldn't be in inclusive education. The only difference was that the teacher would sellotape the sheets of paper to the table. So every year ended, and I went changing teachers, and I had to go to the high school, and I had to adapt to having a new teacher every 50 minutes. Everything happened normally through day-to-day life in school. So as I say, for things to happen, we need to make things happen. We need to put things in motion. This development wasn't only cognitive, but it was also a social and personal development. Being included in a regular school meant that I could make friends. They were friends who I spent time with outside the school, and they took me to different places, and I took part in all their adventures and their games. We grew up together, and we discovered all the good and bad sides of adolescence. So that small child who was in the AACD and couldn't have friendships with other children was completely included. I learned and overcame so many things because of my disability, and by imitating my non-disabled friends. These opportunities I wouldn't have had if I'd have just spent time with children who were similar to me in special schools. Time passed, and these days people are very surprised knowing that even though I have cerebral palsy, I've done 3 degrees, 5 postgraduate degrees, and I've done 2 doctorates as well. I've had more than 80 books published and 98 scientific articles published too. As a journalist, I've also published more than 500 texts, and a lot of those are to do with humanitarian issues. I have lots of free courses online about education, inclusive education, and I've already reached more than 30,000 people. I travel around Brazil by myself, giving speeches, which is a huge achievement for me, because I have to deal with airports and hotels without the support of those people who are normally by my side. I say that I was able to construct my career and my autonomy because I was included within a regular school. I had teachers who didn't focus only on my disability, but they focused on my possibilities. Good teachers are those who learn with the challenges and with the difficult students, who take them out from their comfort zone. After telling you all this, I don't want my story to be seen as an isolated case. Schools need to lose this idea of, or this bad habit of, labeling normal children and special children. True schools need to realize that students are students. Just the same way that I was included in a normal school without having a label, every single child has different conditions, and they need to have the same opportunities. They need to be not only included but also integrated into all the activities around them without restriction. They can't be labeled or told exactly what they are capable of by educators and people around them. In my lessons and in my talks, I talk a lot about this. I'm 51 years old now, and I know that inclusive education is completely possible so long as it's well organized. I can also say that a lot of things have really improved in this sense. I understand that obviously school inclusion could be improved and corrected, but generally I'm very optimistic, and I believe that we are on the right path. Of course, we've got to improve a lot and achieve a lot more, but I can't bear hearing people who say that nothing has changed. They are eternal pessimists. Things have improved, and we have lots of good things to tell and share. And even though, unfortunately, there is a lot of discrimination and barriers in people's behavior and attitudes, we cannot give up. Inclusive education is a movement which is well organized, and we can improve even more, changing things and making a few adjustments. So to conclude, I imagine now those doctors who said that I wouldn't ever be able to learn to read or write when I was a child, what would they think of me now? I'm so grateful to those teachers who included me in normal schools and helped me to reach my academic potential. So through inclusive education, with equity and with living day-to-day in schools, we can guarantee the future of these children and have some very happy surprises. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed what I had to say, and I hope we have another opportunity to see each other again. God bless you. So I think he's given us a very important message, because all of us here can be part of this inclusive process, which happens not just in the classroom, but in all spaces of our lives. And we are part of this network. And Professor Maroca, Teacher Maroca, is one of those, and we need to find inclusion everywhere. But we have to feel that we're part of that network, and let us be multipliers of Maroca and other teachers so that everybody can be included. So now I'm going to ask Professor David to talk. Good morning to you. It's so good to hear you saying good morning, because in preschool, when we say good morning, everybody replies good morning, but when we get to middle school, secondary education, nobody replies. And then when we get to university, people write good morning on their papers. So I'd like to thank the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Sesc. It's great to be here in this wonderful city, which is also very complex. On Monday, I was in a symposium about education. And obviously they were burning buses here, which was rather prophetic. How can we have inclusion when buses are being burned? But it is a wonderful city, even though it's complex. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to describe myself. I've got grey hair. I've got, but in the past it used to be black. And I don't think I need to describe my clothes. But I'd like to say that it's been very well organized here. But there is one thing I'd like to pick you up on. Where is the Portuguese, European Portuguese, the Brazilian Portuguese interpreter? There isn't one. Because some people, when I talk to them in Brazil, they say, ask me if I'm from Argentina. No, I'm from Portugal. And Carlos Drummond Andrade said that Portugal and Brazil were divided by a common language. And sometimes some friends of mine from Portugal were talking to Brazilian friends, and Brazilians said that they have a name, a word called xará, which we don't have. And then people, my Brazilian friends said, well, if you don't, what is xará in Portugal if you haven't got that word? Xará, I think it's a coincidence. And so sometimes, you know, you say xará here Brazil and people understand, but there in Portugal, we don't understand that. So it's a language that unites us, but it also divides us. So I'm going to talk about lots of aspects about international aspects of inclusion, political aspects of inclusion too, and also we're going to look at the levers to be able to reach inclusive education. So it's great to be here with future teachers. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, because before Christ, we were teaching. So the profession that I have chosen is fantastic. It could be better. We could be better respected, but it's an absolutely fantastic profession. And it's great to be here with you. I would also like to thank my co-presenters here, Jacqueline, who introduced me earlier. So I'm going to talk for about half an hour. It's not a lesson, though. It's less time than a lesson. So we're looking at how we can advance and the possibilities for education and inclusion. When I was in Russia, they would talk about problems with inclusion. But there aren't any problems. I'm talking here about the challenges, because we can talk about problems of inclusion, because sometimes people say it's the biggest problem in the world. There aren't social problems, there are no political problems, there are no housing problems. There are only problems with inclusion. And I think that's rather unjust. Because if we think if inclusion isn't perfect, it's a problem. And that is a problem. Because is our housing issue perfect? Is our social situation perfect? So why does inclusion have to be perfect? And if it's not perfect, well, it's a terrible idea. So this is what I'd like to talk to you about. So first of all, let's look at inclusion in international documents and treaties. It's not an idea from Brazil. It's not crazy people from Brazil who thought this. It's an international policy, and it's completely substantiated by all the countries in the world. 4 months ago in Kazakhstan, I gave a talk to talk about inclusion. So I didn't even know where Kazakhstan was. So I went there to talk about inclusion. So these are some of the international documents. So there's the Salamanca Declaration, which says that normal schools or regular schools are the best way of educating students with special educational needs. Then the Convention of Rights of Peoples with Disabilities also talks about inclusion. It talks about the right to inclusive education. And then a declaration from Incheon from 2017 from the UN also says that all students are important and are really need to count. Because quite often we think that inclusion is something that needs to be deserved. Oh, that particular student doesn't deserve being included because he's very lazy. And UNESCO is saying to us that this is not true. All students count, and they really do count. Those who study well and don't study so well, those who come from A and those who come from B, they all have to count. So then we have the 2018 Manual to Guarantee Inclusion and Equity, because inclusion and equity are the foundations of a quality education. That's part of the Sustainable Development Goal 4. So they're the foundations. So it's saying that if we don't have inclusion or equity, then we're building a house on sand. And then if you have some time, maybe you could read this document, which is Rethinking Our Futures Together from 2022. Rethinking, reimagining our futures together. It's a fabulous document from UNESCO, which shows that we need a new social contract for inclusion. The one from Jean-Jacques Rousseau has already gone out of date.
Rethinking our futures together.
So I recommend this document to you. We need to have a new social contract for education which can repair the injustices at the same time as transforming the future. It's like multitasking. We've got to do two things at the same time. We need to repair those injustices and also transform the future. And as I said before, 68% of countries have included in their national legislation the need for inclusive education. And there's a report about that called All Means All by UNESCO from 2020.
Now, in Brazil, there are many other documents. There's a document from 2008, a document that I had an honor of being a consultant for, and it relates to special education needs. In 2015, Brazil ratified some international documents. So Brazil is not outside this international movement that considers the inclusion in education. Now I'm going to talk very quickly about 5 conceptual aspects of inclusive education. So I'm going to go quickly, talk quickly about these topics. So again, 5 conceptual aspects. There's the concept of inclusivity. Today we're talking more about this concept as if it's a property of systems to ensure quality education for everyone. So sometimes people say that their system is inclusive because all children are considered. But inclusion is not just about educating everyone. It's about educating everyone with everyone. And that makes an enormous difference in the policies that are promoted and related to education. So inclusivity means ensuring quality education for everyone in common environments. That is, environments that are organized to be welcoming. The second concept is related to removing barriers. That is, universal educability. And what this says is that all students are able to learn. And there are people that don't believe this. Some people act as if this weren't true. But all children are able to learn. All students are able to learn. A lot of times we hear some teachers complaining, saying that, half of their students don't learn anything. So they'll say, oh, it doesn't matter what we say, they never learn. But that's unfair, isn't it? It's unfair to say that there are people that don't learn anything. So we have to consider this idea of universal educability. I think everybody is able to learn, and they're able to learn well. We need to know our barriers, and we need to remove the barriers for learning. This concept of barriers is very important. We could spend a lot of time talking about it. So what are barriers? There are some people that say, oh, we need some barriers in school because learning isn't a field trip. You need to put in some effort. Sure, but that's not a barrier. A barrier is something else. Barriers are things that schools invented for organization, and sometimes this is an organization that interferes with learning. Let me give you a quick example. you learn about different styles of learning, right? There are systems of teaching, systems of learning. Now, if I learn in only one way, using only one method, it's possible that when my students come across different styles, they might not learn so well with the style that I'm using. Now, if I use two different styles to teach, then maybe I will reach more students. So some of my students say, oh, you know, you're outdated because you still use PowerPoints. But I'll always use PowerPoints because if I use PowerPoints, I will be reaching some students that have a more visual way of learning. So it would be better if we used different means, different multimodal means of teaching. You may not believe what I'm saying, but you can believe in what Almir Sater and Renata Teixeira say. They say that each one of us composes their own story. Every person has the capacity to be able to do things and to be happy. So again, we all have the capacity to be capable, and we all have the capacity to be happy. Then we have the third concept, which is the concept of the multiplying right. Inclusion is a multiplying right. Inclusion isn't just good, it's positive in terms of what it fosters. So this is something that ends up multiplying other rights. So inclusion allowed many other things to be assured. So to ensure inclusion means assuring many other rights. So inclusion, it's an objective, but it's also a means. When we exercise inclusion, we are using a means that allows us to reach our objective. Now, the fourth concept is one regarding enabling environments. Today, we have to consider education not as if a person were alone in the world. And that's not what happens. Inclusion is an interactive process that's relational, social, and sociological. Vygotsky taught us this very well when he said that we learn with other people. So we learn with other people and from other people. So being with other people is fundamental for us to leave our zone of comfort, and this helps us reach our full potential. So we don't understand inclusion if we consider people in an isolated fashion. Do you know who Maria is? Oh, Maria is that blind girl. No, that's not who she is. How can I understand somebody only from their physical characteristics or their disability? Maria is more than just a blind person. Alberto is more than, or rather, Emílio is more than just a person with cerebral palsy. You know, he's written more than 90 books. So he's more than his disability. So that's important because we tend to identify people based on their problems.
Colmeia é assim uma coisa, é como se fosse uma abelha grande, estás a ver? É uma abelha, a gente estuda a abelha e vai perceber a colmeia. Não. Para nós percebermos a inclusão,
for us to understand inclusion, we have to see inclusion as a process of an interactive nature, relational nature, and social and sociological nature. And that's what separates inclusive education from special needs education. In special needs education, we always have to consider the person and their problems, but in inclusive education, it's requested that we consider the tools and the environments and the levers that are available for us to make progress. And finally, we have to consider inclusion as an educational reform. So sometimes in school, for example, we have different projects. We have projects related to the teaching of English and the original inhabitants, and a project related to inclusion. So it's almost as if inclusion were just something to be inserted in education. But inclusion isn't that. Inclusion isn't something that can just be inserted. Inclusion isn't about time or location. So what do we mean by this? Let me tell you a story. Once I went to a school to talk to a colleague, and I talked to the person who was at the entrance of the school the following: who's here working with inclusion? Who's responsible for inclusion at the school? And said, inclusion? Oh, that's Professor Fatima. So I asked her, what happens if Professor Fatima leaves? Will she take inclusion with her? Or what happens with inclusion if Professor Fatima has a headache and doesn't come to school? So if only one person is responsible for inclusion, or if only one place is responsible for inclusion, then what happens? So what happens in other rooms, for example? And what about time? What happens if we dedicate 1 week for organizing inclusion factors? What will happen during the other weeks of the year? So this is something that we can't do. We can't reduce inclusion to people and time. Inclusion is a way of educating, and we need to involve everyone. This is a transversal value. This is a transformative value in educational systems. If we think that inclusion is related to people and places, then we will complicate matters, because we will not be able to reconcile values that are irreconcilable. So, I've got the school curriculum, which is the school curriculum, and I tell people that we need to make the curriculum flexible, but people say, oh, but that's very difficult. What we should be doing is we should be investing energy to be putting things into practice. There was a theorist who used to say that diversity is a fact and inclusion is an act. So if diversity is a fact, inclusion needs to be an act. We need to embrace inclusion because we are inherently different. So diversity is a fact, and that's why inclusion needs to be an act. Now, I like to talk about certain things because of my place of speech. I think people invited me here because Portugal became a case study in terms of inclusion. In 1974, so it's been 50 years now, in 1974, we were an undeveloped country in terms of education. There were 30% of our population couldn't read or write. That's a very high number, right? That's what we inherited from our dictatorship. So that's why I say democracy is healthy for education. Dictatorships are bad for education. They're really bad for education. So today, we have universal public schools, full period, full day, universal public education. So I'm really talking about schools all the way from kindergarten up to high school. Right now, 52% of youngsters are in college. School abandonment or school evasion is less than 6%.
Os nossos resultados em avaliações internacionais, nomeadamente no PISA, no Program of International Student Achievement.
And we achieved great results in international evaluation programs such as PISA. We've been progressing since the early 2000s. So again, I say this to say that democracy did well for our educational system. But let's focus on inclusive education in Portugal. We have a law from 2018 that stopped talking about special education. We don't use that term anymore. Now we use the term inclusive education. And according to the complexity of difficulties of the students, you may have universal, selective, or additional tools to help the student. Every school in Portugal has a multidisciplinary team dedicated to inclusive education. So all schools have a multidisciplinary team to support inclusive education. We have 7,500 teachers to provide support to special education students. And we also have resource centers for inclusion. Because people used to say, okay, so you've done a lot of work with inclusion. What did you do with the special education schools? Well, what we did was we told them that they would no longer be responsible for schooling. So education would take place in schools. So what did we do with these units? We converted them into resource centers related to inclusion. Now, I know that in Brazil, the same thing happens. But you still have children going to these special educational institutions. That's not what happens in Portugal. In Portugal, it's the opposite. Because children need to be educated in school. That's where you can have conversations about student development. So our inclusion resource centers are they're there. So these students do all of these things in school. How can a physical therapist work if, how can they perform if they don't work with a physical education teacher, for example? How can they work well if they don't if they're not working together with a Portuguese teacher, for example?
99% of children with disabilities go to regular schools, and they have severe special needs problems, but they go to other schools. So let's talk about 5 points, 5 levers for us to be able to get to a more inclusive education. So the first of all is to have schools for everyone. So that it can respond to all the different diversity of its students. Is that possible? Talking about cultural diversity, disability, differences of mother tongues and socioeconomic situations. Because if it's only for certain students, then we're going to keep lots of people out of that. So they shouldn't be homogeneous schools. Because how can we decide, you know, it would be absurd to decide, oh, this is for, you know, children who've just come out from poverty. So we need to have a diversified school. So we can't have special schools for every special different need of children, whatever they happen to be. We would need to have many more schools if they were all kind of homogeneous. So let's think of difference and homogeneity. So if we're all different, why do we always try to go for homogeneity within our schools? Yeah, and people say, oh, but we don't want homogeneity, but they do.
ir para esta turma, sabem? Porque ele é assim, tem que ir para uma coisa mais homogénea, estás a ver? Assim, ele vai se
Quite often I
melhor.
hear that word, in fact. So
Ele vai se sentir melhor, tem que ir para uma coisa mais homogénea.
we need something that's more homogeneous.
Fazer grupos, sim. Olha, tu não,
So
vais para aquele grupo, porque eu procuro grupos homogéneos. Andamos
why do we have
sempre
groups? Because we always look for groups that are homogeneous, but we're all different.
Nós batemos com a cabeça
And
e
so
ficamos com esta mania da homogeneidade.
we need to get this idea out of our heads of homogeneity. So
Não é, como se diz no Brasil, não é flor
it's
que se
not a case of
homogeneidade não é flor que se cheira. Porque primeiro reduz a nossa complexidade a único aspecto.
it's something, homogeneity is something that reduces our complexity.
As mesmas experiências, que têm
What is it? It's for children who have,
é a mesma a turma que tem conjunto de conhecimentos
what is it?
académicos que são mais
It's the same class which has the same
Se nós pensarmos em
sort of
termos de capacidade
academic
de pizza,
objectives. So if we look
o
at,
aspecto académico é uma fatia muito fina da pizza, porque há muito mais aspectos para olhar sem ser só o aspecto académico. A homogeneidade
so
não beneficia
there are lots of
da aprendizagem.
aspects to
Não há
education.
qualquer
So
evidência científica
there is
que a homogeneidade beneficia a aprendizagem.
there is nowhere that says that homogeneity helps learning.
Ensino menos interessante, aquele ensino que é todo feito da mesma maneira,
Because when we have
ser interessante.
education which is done by the same way, it creates homogeneous culture, but we don't have any evidence that this helps learning. So it ends up creating a centripetal force, making the group go even further within itself. And then if you have an identity outside that group, it's very difficult to include those people. So looking at difference and inequality, quite often we confuse what is being different and what is being unequal. We're different for three reasons, mainly for our genetics, our experiences, and also our social situation. And those differences are positive because 2 days ago I was in a community here in Rio, and she said, poetry comes and goes with the wind. Wow. Had I not come to this community and talked to this woman, I would never have heard that. So difference is always positive, but inequality is another thing. It happens because of usually factors that we can't control. Is being a woman or being a man the same thing in Brazil? You don't need to reply. Is being rich and being poor in Brazil the same thing? Being black or white, is it the same? Muslims, Christians, are they the same? But if you think about that, these are factors that are social conditions that we can't control. They're social markers, let's say. So there's this book here, The Tyranny of Merit by Sandel, which shows how much inequality exists. There's also inequality is also a factor in the lack of development, and that comes from a book by Sesc Souza called A Elite do Atraso. So one thing is being different, and it's good that we're different. Poetry comes and goes with the wind, for example. But it's another thing to be unequal. And that has to do with a lack of development and social injustice. Because if we are valued or undervalued, normally it's because of factors that we have no control over. Because some people say, I'm rich because I worked a lot. And I've seen is that really true? Because at 5 in the morning, when you look at the buses in Rio, who go and work at that time, are they rich? No. That gives the impression that people who are poor are those people who get up at 11 and have their breakfast then. So remember that difference and inequality are different. So inclusion is something that we learn with difference and not with equality. So let's talk a little bit now more practically. I'm not sure how we're doing for time. I don't want to be shot down in them, but I'd like to look at 5 aspects that are levers for inclusive education. And remember that a lever is something that is able to improve or increase the strength of something. So the first lever is the curriculum. So there is no reason why a curriculum needs to be fixed, because then that's going to be legitimize those people who just follow the curriculum, who don't leave that. We need to be able to be more flexible with our curriculum. If not, we're not going to be able to work with inclusion. We're going to legitimize exclusion. So it's not something that's determined. So a colleague of mine who comes from Finland, when we hear the name Finland, we like cross ourselves because, wow, their education is so amazing. So we talked to him about the curriculum there, and he said, well, don't you have a document about your curriculum? Yeah, we kind of have. 16 pages long. Just 16 pages? Yeah. Because people are more interested that the curriculum is good. And so we just give them some general guidelines, which are fundamental, of course, but then we do that with the schools so that it's not something that's fixed, that's a relic that we need to follow. We want it to be a differentiated curriculum. And so there's this word design, this universal design of learning. Design is not the same as, this is an issue about the Portuguese language, but desenho can mean design and drawing, but design is used in this book here by David Rose and Anne Mayer, which is about motivation, organization, expression of knowledge. And there are many ways of organizing and motivating and expressing knowledge. I'll give you an example. So, people who've got bad grades here, if I could get rid of 2 bad grades, what would... Se eu pegar em dois apontamentos, esses apontamentos não são iguais, pois não? So those, they're not the same.
Organizamos o conhecimento todos de forma diferente. E agora vem a má notícia. Se nós organizarmos, será que os nossos alunos também organizam?
So
Sim,
let's.
claro que sim.
I've got some bad news for you. If we are sort of disillusioned by our curriculum and so on, so obviously our students will be. So we need to then motivate our students in different ways and also organize the knowledge that we offer them in different ways. In the same way that we need to think that everybody can come through these doors here, people who have visual impairments, disabilities, etc., to give them universal accessibility, then we need to think of a universal design for our curriculum so that everybody can participate in it and learn with it. And so they feel that they are included and participating in learning. So innovation is incredibly important. That's the second point. If we do what we were doing before, then we're going to have the same results that we had before. But the objective is not to be innovative. We don't need to be innovators necessarily. You know, it's not like we can take a pill and suddenly become innovative. It's not an end in itself. It's just an answer to be able to motivate all students to participate and to learn. Innovation has lots of different names. We can talk about active innovation. We can have connections to concrete situations, design thinking. Now, here in Brazil, you have an enormous wealth in terms of innovation and creativity. When we go to schools in Brazil, we are just amazed by what you do, the energy that you have, the desire you have. But we can't just, that's not enough in itself, but it's still very important. But we need to be able to motivate all students to be motivated and to learn. We also need devices and resources. They're a little bit different. Devices is something that I can use to be able to help with teaching. So we know that there are some children who prefer learning in groups. So we can use that as a device within our classrooms. It's completely up to me and it's completely attainable for me. But sometimes we feel that teachers are disempowered. Oh, what am I going to do? There are so many things you can do as a teacher. Is that not true? So I can change the way I speak. I can, strategies, time, so many things can be modified, and they're within my reach. So if you're doing courses, then you can develop different strategies. So resources, okay, sometimes resources don't arrive in schools because, but quite often we can, here in Brazil, who come from outside the classroom to help within the classroom. We've got a new law to do with autism to have carers within classrooms. So we can use lots of different resources outside schools to help us. Some people see that as a problem because there are so many adults within a classroom, but how can I otherwise support students who have difficulties? So devices and resources are things that come from outside schools that we need to bring them inside the schools. So Malansko, who's a theorist, says that schools know a lot more than they imagine. So it's important to be able to use those and put them into practice. So the fourth thing is collaboration and training. And this is critical for us to be able to create inclusive environments that are successful ones. Because I don't know any teacher who can create an inclusive school by themselves. A single teacher alone cannot do it. But that also means, on the flip side, that a single person cannot destroy inclusion in a school. So collaboration is absolutely fundamental for inclusion. And so we need to work together within schools. Because sometimes we have colleagues who are a little bit, but those colleagues can help us with strategies, with thinking, with the knowledge that they have.
Okay, so, I had material here for 3 hours, but I'm not going to talk about all of these topics. And we have also the issue of continuing education. So, how should we do in-service training to promote inclusion? Well, this is an important topic. But there are a lot of issues a lot of things that we know. We know that in-service training needs to be contextualized. This is what literature tells us. So if we think that, we can just teach people and that they will apply this, that's not realistic. We need continuing education that's contextualized and based on the school's problems. This is what will help the school to progress. So we need to find the problem, we need to create concepts, and we need to intervene. So that's what we need to do. And then we need to talk about public policies. A lot of people ask me in Brazil, okay, well, here we have a lot of problems. How will we solve these problems? Well, there are a lot of issues in Brazilian education that needs to involve public policies. Public policies have a fundamental role in the development of quality in education and in development of inclusive education. Now, in the Portuguese case, the full-day school was important for the development of inclusion. So, but what does a full-day school have to do with inclusion? Well, we have more time to provide support, because if the student is there the whole day, we have more time to help them. We have teachers that work only at a single school, so we don't have teachers working in different schools, and that helps with inclusion. Because now the school will be more focused on its objectives. So full-day schools are more expensive because you need to build more schools, you need to have more teachers. So yes, it's more expensive, but it's important. I think in France they used to say, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Ignorance is way more expensive. So, public policies need to focus on the priorities for the development of education. There are public policies that favor service in special schools instead of in regular schools. So people would say, look, when we want to do a project in a public school, there's nobody to help us. We're always waiting for the city or the state or some federation to help us. That's the only place where we get help. But if we get a parent coming to school to request something, then all of a sudden the money, the resources for that shows up. So sometimes we have public policies that favor special education more than inclusive education. So that's something interesting for us to consider. So what are the public policies or priorities in terms of financing? I've heard that sometimes there are public policies, not just for financing certain things, but there are public policies that, again, favor special schools more than public schools. And this, and the idea is this that you see here, that financing is this plug, and the other aspect is the outlet. So we have things that don't match. We have financing policies that sometimes value and that emphasize and that finance the cost of inclusion. So there's money for education, that's the plug. And sometimes this goes for a student that has autism, but that student may be in a regular school instead of a special needs school. So sometimes these things don't match. So let me summarize based on the Brazilian scenario. We have 4 issues or 4 questions that we need to answer. So the first question is, how can the AEE have a more inclusive vision instead of having 2 schools instead of the same school? So the AEE teacher and the students So how can we move inclusion forward? Does it make sense for the AEE to provide support to the whole school, or should it provide support just for the student that has a prescription for that service? So, you know, sometimes if
A importância do laudo.
there's no recommendation for that kind of service, then people can't get the
Como é que eu
service.
vou trabalhar com este aluno se eu não tenho um laudo?
So teachers ask themselves, well, how can I work with the student if I don't have some diagnosis of the student? And then we'll say, okay, well, the student has this and that problem. Can you now teach them how to read and write?
É isto?
Is that what you needed?
Que diferença faria
Third
a
question,
generalização de alargar escolas públicas para tempo integral?
would generalization
Podia ser
to broaden public schools be better?
de alargar as escolas públicas para tempo integral. E quarto aspecto, que papel da
And then the fourth aspect is, what's the role,
escolas, eu há pouco falei da
what
parte
supporting
das
role
escolas,
can
muitas outras
special
escolas,
schools
que papel
with
de apoio podem ter as escolas
resources,
como recursos para a escola regular? Como é que estas escolas podem contribuir?
how can schools contribute?
E basicamente,
How can these schools contribute to regular
talvez
schools?
nós olharmos para conceito, o Michael Lennon publicou
Michael Lennon
interessante
published a
chamado,
very interesting book
Diversidade Epistémica.
called Epistemic Diversity.
Difícil, mas
It's a difficult
diversidade
title,
epistémica
but
tem a ver sobre
epistemic diversity is related to
qual é a
this
possibilidade, onde é que nós vamos
question,
recrutar
that is,
meios
where are the
para produzir
possibilities, where are the
serviços
means?
diversos e comuns para dar sentido à nossa existência. É isto que é diversidade.
How can we make give sense to our existence? So this is what we're looking for. That is, where will we find knowledge that are common and useful to give meaning to our lives? We were talking about perfection. The space of inclusive education is in the space of possibilities. The fact that we work with students with disabilities means that we are trying to be inclusive. So what we have to do is the best that we can do. If we think that we need to be perfect, then that's actually going to hamper us. Sometimes we will think, well, if we can't be perfect, if we can't get things right, then it would be better if we did nothing. Because we will say, oh, we don't have the means to work with these students, so we won't do anything. But look, the special schools also don't have the means or the resources. There are studies today that show us that these special schools value occupational skills. This is something that we all know, but nobody admits. We want to believe that if these students are special needs students are at these schools, then everything's okay. So the space of special education is the space of possibilities, and not this, and doesn't belong in this idea of perfection. When we work with inclusion, you know, when there's water, we don't have a bucket, and when we don't have a bucket, there's no water. So this is common, but that's life. We have to do the best we can. We don't have to be perfect. We should just try to do whatever we can. And UNESCO, in its report, used to say that everyone means, or rather all means all. So we have a world, a picture here where the world is on top and all children are being valued. So we have to work on a school that we want for our children. And these children need to be able to come from wherever they come from. So a school, we need to have a school for everyone and with everyone. Thank you. Okay, so after this incredible talk, I'm sure that we were left thinking about lots of different things.
Não, tô com...
Você apontou alguma coisa?
Não, tava ajeitando aqui.
Que a gente forme, então, esse grande
So
coletivo
I think we should really create a collective for cooperation so that we can help each other.
Esse encontro de hoje renova,
So I think
eu acho que aprendi
our
bocado,
encounter here
renova a
today
esperança também, né?
is probably allowing us all to learn a lot, and this renews
Que a gente possa
or
se sentir parte do mesmo mundo.
renews my hope.
Me sinto,
I hope that we can all
estimulada a
be a
refletir sobre
part of
muitas
this
questões a partir
different
de hoje,
world.
não só com a fala de Rodrigo, mas de Davi, mas do
I
Emílio
think we can
também.
really reflect about all of these
Acho que ficaram
issues.
ensinamentos muito profundos e reflexivos
We
para
were
nós.
left with a lot of important
Vou deixar
information.
espaço também para Marcelo.
And I will give Marcelo now the opportunity to say a few
Não
things.
posso falar,
Ótimo. Então, vou passar
posso
aqui.
me arriscar depois.
Yeah, I guess I
dessas
can
duas
try
falas.
saying
Foi até
something.
rápido. Eu nem precisei marcar os 5 ali para te dar o bombardeio.
I think you were right on time with your talk, so you finished within the allotted
Bom dia
time.
novamente, né, a
So,
todos,
good morning to
todos.
everyone.
É incrível, né, depois dessas duas falas do Emílio,
So, we had these
do
two
professor Davi,
incredible
a gente
talks
fala
from
alguma
Emílio and
coisa e até
Professor
arriscar
Davi.
demais,
And I don't
falar
know
como
if I have
especialista e
much
se
to
tornar uma
add, but
pessoa com
I'm not going to
deficiência.
talk as a specialist, but rather as a person with a
Essas
disability.
informações devem reverberar aí pra
So I'm sure
vocês,
that all of the information that was shared with you here will end up reverberating. Maybe some of the young people here today are wondering what we were talking about, but
E de como foi o processo dele.
the important thing, for example, when Emílio was talking, was I think the important thing was about what he did in terms of education.
Vocês
So,
apostariam na
If
educação do
let's
Emílio?
think about one thing. If you were
Vocês
Emílio's
fossem
parents, would you bet on his
professores do
education?
Emílio,
If you were
vocês apostariam
Emílio's
na
teacher,
educação do Emílio?
would you bet on his
Por que eu tô
education?
querendo chamar a atenção aqui?
So why am I
É que
asking you
se
this
trata de uma
question?
pessoa.
Well, here we're talking about a
Todo
person.
esse processo, todo esse estudo teórico que vem
So
se
these
desenvolvendo
studies
ao
and
longo
these
dos anos,
theories that have
no sentido
been
de
developed over the
proporcionar
years,
a inserção, a
these
inclusão da
studies
pessoa
related
com
to the
deficiência
insertion of
no
people
ambiente
with
escolar
disabilities in educational
eu
environments.
acho que ainda carece de muita revisão.
These studies still need to be revised. They still need more reflection.
O avanço que a gente já alcançou,
We've
só o fato,
made
por exemplo,
a lot
de
of
estar aqui
progress,
ocupando o
yes.
palco,
I mean, the fact that I'm here on stage already says a lot
enquanto sociedade,
in terms of our development and our progress as a society. But I still think that we need to leave our zone of comfort. Because we talk about inclusion, and this inclusion is done based on identifying a person, but then we put in a lot of effort to not leave our zone of comfort. So, we want to bring these people with disability to our spaces, but disability is actually about, expansion. It's not just about a person with a disability. When we hear about this term, we think about a person with a disability. But let's pretend that people with disabilities didn't exist. Then let's ask ourselves, are our schools inclusive? Yesterday we had Barbara Carini here talking to us, and she's the founder of the first Afro-Brazilian school in the country. And she was saying that one time teachers would ask her, they asked her, oh, it's Easter, what do we do? Are we going to remove that holiday from our school calendar? How will we deal with Easter? And she said that she thought a lot about this topic. She was trying to understand how she would manage this issue. And basically she said, no, let's not remove Easter from the school calendar. Rather, let's include other festivals such as the Toré or the Ogum Black Bean Festival. So, it was an Afro-Brazilian school, but it included other things. And a lot of people would ask her, is your Afro-Brazilian school just for black children? And she would say, no, it's for people, it's for everyone. So inclusion should be a process of expansion. We shouldn't just think about adapting what we have to attract more people to perform within a dynamic that we already have. If we do that, we're not going to evolve. we are actually we're not going to allow people and our students to expand beyond their means, because we're only going to be perpetuating our exclusive behaviors.
So I think we need to reflect about that. Inclusion as an opportunity to expand as a society, to recognize the potential in diversity, in plurality, and in humanity. We're much more than just a person with disability or a gender or a race, and we're refusing still to come out from our comfort zone. We're afraid of the new, of the unexpected. Look at Emílio on the screen. He's written more than 90 books with cerebral palsy. I haven't written a single one, not yet anyway. I've got, son, grandson, but, like, not a book. So if his effort had been denied by the people who he met along his way, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to understand this human being and his potential, which he has so generously shared with us. So what I'd like to contribute here is to allow our colleague and professor here to talk, and we can see inclusion as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for all of us. And I think there are two main pillars for us to be able to overcome ableism in society: information and education, and also promotion, dissemination of information that has been created by people with disabilities when we're talking about this particular section of society. And the other pillar is living alongside these people, because if we don't know these people, we're not going to understand these people, and we're going to understand just the technical aspects to be able to adapt the space, but just knowing that a ramp is good for a wheelchair and not for a person who is a wheelchair user or a person who uses sort of aids or walking sticks, or who is, a little bit tired and doesn't want to walk up some stairs, or to just play. So accessibility is not just for people with disabilities, because otherwise we'll just understand that like stairs don't have any use for people with disabilities, but they do, because not every disabled person is necessarily a wheelchair user like me. So this is why I say that inclusion is a process of expansion and understanding that stairs are important, but don't have a relationship with all diversity of life. So we need to have other forms of access which allow us, or allow a larger number of people to participate in spaces, especially educational spaces. So that was the only thing that I wanted to say at the moment, and I'll let Professor Emílio tell us more now. I think your contribution was wonderful, thinking about expansion and welcoming diversity and epistemic diversity, which our colleague mentioned. But now let's talk to Emílio. Can you hear us? Hi, Emílio, can you hear us? Hello, good morning. Are you all well? Yeah, you hearing me? Good morning. So thank you for being here with us online. And if you'd like to say something so that then we can begin our question and answer session.
Eu queria agradecer o convite. Eu fiquei muito feliz em participar dessa mesa. É muito uma alegria muito grande. E claro, essa pergunta, tá bom?
I have a question. Here, so yeah, we're going to ask for people to participate with their questions. We're going to take 3 questions from the floor.
Pela escola?
Começa pela segunda.
Ah, sim, vamos começar pela segunda, é verdade. Pode sim. Tem, acho que...
Deu certo, né?
Ai, foi o microfone? Aí...
So, have we got the microphone?
Obrigada. Bom dia a todos.
So, good morning to everyone.
Professor Davi, queria fazer uma
Professor David, I wanted to ask you a question that's worth $1 million. $1 million question.
Não sei se é possível, mas você consegue enxergar algum caminho, entender um caminho?
Can you see
Faça com que a gente
if there's a path to help us
pare de olhar apenas para o projeto pedagógico,
to stop looking at
né?
pedagogical
E
projects, i.e. education in schools,
pro sujeito de direito, né?
and look at those people as subjects who have rights
Será
as
que
students.
existe?
Is there a way of doing that?
Como
Eu
é que
ia
a gente faz
valorizar mais
isso?
a pergunta também, talvez mais milhões aí nessa pergunta.
I think it's worth more than $1 million, that
Né?
question,
Importante.
because it's an important premise for human rights. How can we do this, though, in schools, especially in the situation today?
Perfeito. Quem mais?
Any other questions?
Lado. Colega do microfone, por favor.
Eu queria perguntar quando
I wanted to
o Emílio se sentiu pela primeira vez
ask
excluído,
Emílio,
excluído.
when was the first moment that he felt included in society and not excluded? Because quite often we think we're including a disabled person where in fact we're limiting them to what we think they can and cannot do. And it is difficult for us sometimes to understand, but I wanted to know from Emílio when he felt really included for the first time.
Milhões.
That's another $2 million question.
Alta aqui pelas perguntas. Não é? Vamos lá, terceira agora de 10 milhões. Quem vai?
Next question.
Aqui na frente, amiga.
Here at the front.
Obrigado pela palestra, obrigado, Emílio.
Thank you very much to you all for the talk, Emílio and David. It was really stimulating for us. There are lots of things that we need to think about and to improve the situation in schools, to become more inclusive. But I've got one concern about the relationship between regular schools and special schools, because there's a because there are special schools in Rio, for example, from the Institute for Deaf People, for the Institute for blind people, and then we have other special schools. And in Europe, there's a controversy over this notion of deinstitutionalizing. What does that mean exactly, to deinstitutionalize? So I think there may be 2 guidances to do this. The first one might be a radical one, let's just close all these institutions, which I don't agree with. And there's another possibility, which is let's change the relationships between these special schools and institutions with regular schools. And as you said, David, they could become support institutions, maybe. So I saw on TV Justiça a debate which was precisely about this, about the possibilities for inclusive education for special institutions. It was a very interesting debate. So, sorry, I've said rather a lot, but that was my question. So, let's first of all ask Emílio. So, Emílio, our colleague asked you when you felt included for the first time.
Que eu ia para a faculdade, minha tese de doutorado, foi onde fui excluído. Eu tive muitas dificuldades na vida acadêmica, mas antes, na escola, eu era totalmente incluído.
I think in school I felt included in the regular school. But I think the problem with inclusion is to do with the... Did you manage to understand me? Thank you. Okay, I'm going to be as quick as possible so that we can get more questions in. So, first of all, she asked about whether we should just continue within an educational course. But if we... Sometimes it's like going into a dark room, and then, you know, once we've been in the light, when we go into a dark room, we don't see anything. But then eventually our eyes adjust and we can start seeing things. And diversity is exactly the same. So the first things that we see are people with disabilities, or what we think huge disabilities, and that's why we decided to create special education. And we could see very well. I'm not talking about social invisibility. But then we noticed that there's some people who don't have disabilities, but they have disorders. And now it's very clear to us that this is a result of socio-cultural situations or their backgrounds. So we decided that we had to include them as well. So I think that we will get there eventually. We need to include and look at even more people and look at their difference. And, you know, we've seen people with disabilities, with disorders, with problems, but soon we're going to see that people... There are very few people who don't have any issue at all. And I'm not sure when we'll get there, but my work is so that this happens sooner rather than later. And even though the second question was for Emílio, when he felt included, so we're feeling very included here, but sometimes when I hear or say a joke about Brazil, I'm not included because the joke isn't understood. So that's the same with people with disabilities, and the same with young people here. Sometimes we feel included, sometimes we feel excluded. Is that not true? So I think that is the case for all of us. So sometimes we take a step forward in the darkness and sometimes within the light. So coming back to Eric now, inclusion is a political decision. That's very clear. Even though it's very disguised, it's absolutely a political choice. The other thing to say is, talking about disinstitutionalization, so why do we need that? Because we have institutionalized so much. That's the reason. So now we've got to take down these institutions. Why? Because institutions only were there for specific responses within their field and not outside them. So how can we create answers outside these closed environments, which are environments which have been proven do not defend human rights of people or their participation? So how can we create conditions outside these environments for those people?
Well, I think what we need to do, or rather we need to follow the examples that we see. Many years ago, we began a process of disinstitutionalization. We used to say that people who have mental problems shouldn't be in hospices. They should be outside of hospices. And we were able to do that. So why can't we apply the same kind of thinking in education? Well, I think we really moved forward with disinstitutionalization in healthcare. So I think we can apply the same to education. But again, it's a political choice. There are countries that are only concerned with the difficulties of inclusion and not the possibilities. And, you know, education is a battleground. It's a battleground in the sense. People have different ways of seeing this. And I think it's great to be a part of the Inclusion Army. I would also like to hear from Marcelo. Marcelo, what can we do in terms of these political and pedagogical projects? What can we do to promote inclusion? Well, it starts at home. I think everything starts at home. I think governments and institutions can help us. Their work is important, but everything for me starts at home. Ableism starts at home. The process of exclusion starts at home. And inclusion also starts at home. We have to understanding the humanity of people with disabilities starts at home. We're always outsourcing the responsibility of caring for these people to other people, but we don't exercise this kind of care. So I think everybody should try and understand the humanity of people with disabilities. So these people are still people despite their disabilities, despite their different behaviors or different facial expressions. These people are still people. As a society, we end up denying the humanity of people with disabilities. We believe that these disabilities are defects or diseases that need to be cured or corrected. And this ends up isolating the social group. When we don't recognize the humanity of these people, that's what ends up happening. So our work needs to start at home. During the history of humanity has always involved this problem. I think the most important thing is this idea of interdependence, because we are all interdependent. All human beings are. But we are always trying to be independent. But this independence is an illusion. It doesn't exist. And this idea of independence starts when we turn 18. Before we turn 18, I don't know if you remember, but I believe some people here are not even 18 yet, and they might actually be going through this moment right now. They're excited about becoming, reaching legal age and being able to do whatever they want, when they want, and not doing what they don't want to do. And the same thing applied to me. I turned 18. But that's the only thing that happened. Nothing changed in my life. Everything remained the same. But as a society, as a Western society, where we have an economic system that says that human beings turn into human beings when they turn 18, because that's basically, when you can start working and negotiate things on your own terms. And there's this idea that you're only human until you retire. And after that, you lose your humanity, because then you lose your independence, supposedly. Now, those of you here who are over 18 years old, which one of you actually created your own clothes? Which one of you created your automobiles or the transport system that you used to get here? None of you, right? All of us, we're all interdependent. We all depend on each other, regardless of our age. We are an animal that, if we are not helped by our parents, we end up dying. But our economic system and our Western perspective ends up removing our humanity. And our system doesn't consider this interdependence that's inherent in humanity. So we remove humanity from the elderly and from those who are young. But interdependence is part of our nature. We all want to be independent, but that's not real. We will never reach that objective. There's an African theory that, for me, expresses really well what it means to be human, and that's the Ubuntu or Ubuntu philosophy. They say that I am because you are, and you are because I am. I will only be, and I will only be aware of who I am based on my relationship with other people and my environment during my lifetime. If I don't have this opportunity, then maybe I might actually question my existence. So we deny what is essential to us. We negate what is essential to us. And we, people with disabilities, we've always existed during all of history. And we've actually contributed very much to society. And, sometimes we remain invisible because we have a hard time understanding that we're interdependent and that we're different. But there shouldn't be a reason for prejudice. This should actually make us feel warm and fuzzy. We need to try and understand how powerful we are and how different we are. And that this is what makes all of humanity so rich. Now, what's your name? Maria Eduarda, okay. So I actually want to answer Maria Eduarda's question. She asked Emílio, when it was that he actually felt included in life. So me, I'm 49 years old, Maria Eduarda, and I felt included only in September of this year. This happened during the month of Green September, which is a month of people with disabilities. So the Quilombo of which I'm a part, the Quilombo of people with disabilities, we actually worked with another collective of LGBT people, and we organized our first Pride parade for people with disabilities in São Paulo. That's when I actually felt like I belonged. That's when I actually felt like I included. Not just because there were a lot of different types of people with disabilities there, not just because of the different artistic expressions of these people. I actually felt included because people without disabilities also participated in that parade. So we had people there that no longer exclude us and that don't allow us to be invisible. Not fighting for our rights would be like giving up on our lives. Now, I'm not romanticizing the lives of people with disabilities. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not saying that we should all be disabled. That's not what our project is about. But again, people with disabilities do exist, and they're people, they're human. And we need to relate to them. Now, we should work on the technical perspectives, and we should work with medical teams, but we should work with doctors not based on this idea of who we are based on our limitations or our disabilities, but we should include the social aspects, and we should consider the barriers that these people face in society. These barriers, they limit us. Because like you said, we define spaces. We say where people with disabilities can be and where they can participate. And that's not inclusion. So I've been working a lot with this topic, this theme, so that I can actually have a peaceful relationship with this topic. Because when we think about inclusion, we ask ourselves, well, include where? Because we're already here, we already exist. So if we are to think about inclusion, then maybe it would make more sense for people without disabilities to include themselves in the world of people with disabilities. Because again, we've always existed throughout the whole of history. And during all of this time, we've been developing strategies and expertise and ways of surviving and resisting. We've been finding ways to participate, even without being invited to participate. We know all of the barriers that exist in our lives. We know all of you. It is you who don't know us and understand us. So again, it's the logic, it should be the opposite. You're the ones who should include yourselves in our experience and in our lives. I think by doing that, we can achieve that idea of expansion. That's great, Marcelo. Okay, so I think we won't have time for any more questions, unfortunately, but that's okay. If anybody else wants to ask a question, maybe you can just write your question down on a piece of paper with your email, and then we can give your questions to our panelists. So again, our panelists asked us to reflect on a lot of different topics. And basically, I want this conversation to continue into the future. And Have a great day. Thank you, David. Thank you, Emílio. Thank you, Marcelo.
Muito obrigada ao Sesc também.
And thank you, Sesc,
Na pessoa de Priscila e Adriana e de toda
represented here by Priscila and Adriana. And I'd like to also thank the sign language interpreters. So that's it. Let's go have lunch now. And then afternoon we'll come back.
Não, não. Eu fico com ele.